you meant the last one this year, not the last one.
Well, yes, the last one that's planned, and the last one for this year.
Okay. It's a great seminar. I attended one other, Paul Geddes'. I spend most of my time in New Orleans, so I'm not a regular here, but if I lived in Vancouver regularly, I would be a regular attendee. Usually what I do when I give a talk is I write notes for myself because I'll forget what I'm doing otherwise, but Don was very kind and he gave me a whole bunch of notes, so I'm going to follow Don's notes. Not fully, but roughly. I'll try to get to what he is saying. Now, I wanted to start off by the way I see libertarianism. And the way I see libertarianism, it's like an Indian teepee where you have a whole bunch of sticks and they meet right at the top. And here is like where the people live in there, and this is where all the sticks cross. And where all the sticks cross is libertarianism. And the way I see libertarianism has got really three elements. One is the non-aggression principle. The non-aggression principle, which means that you can do anything you want, just don't initiate violence against other people or their property. If somebody punches me in the jaw, that's okay if I agree to it. We're in the boxing match and you punch me in the jaw, that's okay, and I can punch you back because we've agreed to it. Sadomasochism is okay. My SM joke is, the masochist says to the sadist, beat me. And the sadist says, no. Not very funny, but what the heck, I'm trying. Okay, so that's the non-aggression principle. But you need private property rights, otherwise how do I know if I'm stealing something or I'm just repossessing stuff? So the second element is private property rights. And private property rights from the libertarian point of view are based on John Lockean homesteading theory. If you mix your labor with some land, you clear a path and you get rid of some rocks and some trees, and now you put in a crop, well, you own the crop. Somebody else might domesticate a cow, and he owns the cow. And we all own ourselves. I have 3-year-old grandchildren, and I can see them homesteading themselves. Like when they were a few weeks old, they were sort of out of it. They didn't know what they were doing. Now that they're 3 years old and mature, they're more taking control over their lives. They're homesteading themselves, if you can be poetic about it. So we own ourselves, and we own that bit of property that we homestead. And then Robert Nozick has this thing of legitimate title transfer. So I put in a crop of corn, and you domesticated a cow. I own the corn, you own the milk and the cow, and now we trade. So I get some milk even though I didn't produce it, you get some corn even though you didn't produce it, but you can trace it back to a voluntary exchange and to initial homesteading. And the third element of libertarianism, the way I see it, is free association. Nobody should be forced to associate with anyone against his will. All association should be voluntary. The only problem with rape is that the rape victim doesn't want to associate with the rapist. The only problem with slavery is that the slave doesn't want to associate with the master. Otherwise, it would be fine. If it was willing, then it would be voluntary sexual intercourse or voluntary slavery or something like that. The key element is somebody is forced to associate with somebody else against his will, and we libertarians oppose that. Okay, so this is the nub of libertarianism. What's this stuff and what's this stuff? Well, this stuff is justifications of libertarianism, and there are various justifications of libertarianism. For example, one of them is religion. According to the Bible, you're supposed to keep your mitts off, you're not supposed to steal, murder, whatever. So some people, religious libertarians, which is not a contradiction in terms, I happen to be an atheist, but there are many libertarians who are religious, and they justify the non-aggression principle and private property rights and free association, named libertarianism, based on religion. Then there are utilitarians, and they think that, and I agree with them, that if we have libertarianism, we will have more peace and prosperity than if we don't. Another possibility is Ayn Rand says somehow A equals A, And from this, she deduces libertarianism. Don't ask me, I'm not sure how it works, but that's just another justification of it. And then there's a Hans Hoppe, who has a thing called argument from argument, and he justifies libertarianism in that way. My own personal contributions to libertarianism is not so much justifying it, but rather getting the implications of it. So, what are the libertarian view on unions? Well, that's over here. What's the libertarian view on prostitution? Well, that's over here. What's the libertarian view on abortion, on immigration? And what's the libertarian view on anything would be the implications of libertarianism. So just to review, libertarianism is like a teepee, an Indian tent. Here are the justifications of it. Here's what it is. Non-aggression principle, private property rights, and free association. And here are the implications of it. What are our views on whatever stems, hopefully, from these three elements of libertarianism. Okay, with that introduction, I want to get into some of Don's orders to me, or suggestions to me, notes that he gave me. So, how does one gain property rights in the libertarian view? By homesteading. So we've sort of covered that one. First use, he who uses something first, not last, but first, is the owner of it. If somebody else, I have a farm now, and if you start homesteading on my farm, you're trespassing. So it's not the second or the last user, it's the first user that is the owner of it. How are libertarian property rights different than common law property rights or statutory property rights? Well, common law property rights is really weird. You invite some person to live with you, usually a person of the opposite sex, but nowadays, you know, any other person, and they live with you. It's your house. They live with you for 5 years, and then somehow you break up and they get part of your property. That's common law property rights, which would be anathema to libertarian property rights because it's your house. Just because you had a guest there for 5 years or 3 years or 22 years, it doesn't mean that they should own part of your house or your car or anything else. So I think libertarians would reject common law property rights. And what's statutory property rights? That's whatever the government says property rights are. And sometimes they're correct if they adhere to libertarianism. And when they don't, then they're incorrect. Okay. Are there rights of way and easements? What's going on here? I now have to introduce you to what I call bagel theory or donut theory. So what's bagel theory or donut theory? Well, here's a bagel or a donut.
Walter, would you try the black color? I think it's a bit hard in the light. The light's a bit red and the pen's a bit red.
Sure.
One there.
Everyone's an art critic.
Well, you know.
Victor and I are in competition as who's the best artist, and so far I'm winning because he's got nothing up here and I've got something.
We can't see the red from back here.
Ah, okay, well, thanks for the suggestion. I could see it fine, but okay, so here we have a bagel, and the bagel has got 3 areas.
Oh, yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. A is the hole in the bagel, and B is the bagel, and C is the area outside the bagel. Now the question is, can you homestead in this format? May you homestead in this format? And I say no. You may not homestead in the bagel format. Why not? Because the whole idea of homesteading is you only control that which you've homesteaded, and here you control the area A, which could be a square mile or something like that, even though you haven't touched it. You've only homesteaded the bagel area, the B area, right? And yet you're controlling something that you didn't homestead, so I don't think you can do it. It's impermissible, and if you do it, what you have to do is allow some sort of egress, allow other people in there. Otherwise, you're controlling something that you really shouldn't be controlling. Now here the reason I came up with this is because of an entirely different area. And by the way, I'm a big fan of fudging. I know what the right answer is sometimes, and we just have to concoct the reasons. I know that it is illegitimate for you when you bring your baby home from the hospital, a mother and father bring a baby home from the hospital, and you just leave the baby in the back room and you don't feed him. I know that there's something wrong there. On the other hand, one of the elements of libertarianism, and there are no positive obligations. So is it a positive obligation to feed the baby? You see the tension here, the problem here. On the one hand, I don't want to be associated with people who don't feed their babies, who kill their babies, not by killing them, but by not feeding them. On the other hand, I want to adhere to the libertarian principle of no positive obligations. There are only negative obligations. I have a right not to be murdered. Every time there's a right, there's also an obligation. So I have a right not to be murdered. You have an obligation, you dirty dog, not to murder me. I have a right not to be raped, so you have an obligation not to rape me. A positive obligation is I have a right to food, so you have to feed me. That's not libertarianism. So does the parent have a positive obligation to feed the baby? No. The parent has an obligation to feed the baby, but not a positive obligation to feed the baby. Why? Because of bagel theory. The baby is the area in the middle. The baby, in effect, you see, you can't own a baby, but you can own the rights to be the guardian of the baby. You can homestead the baby's guardianship rights. You can't own the baby, but you can own the guardianship rights. How do you get the guardianship rights to the baby? By feeding it and caring for it and diapering the baby, doing the ordinary, usual things. If you don't do it, then it's as if you're controlling the baby because it's in your house and you're not feeding them. So you have to bring the baby to a hospital or a orphanage or a church or somewhere where somebody will take care of the baby. And that's not a positive obligation. That's just getting out from under the problem of killing the baby by not feeding it. So I knew that I didn't want to have people starving babies, and I knew I didn't want to give up on the positive-negative obligation, so I concocted this bagel theory. And Stephan Kinsella was kind enough to call this the Lockean proviso, named after the Lockean proviso. Now, John Locke had a proviso, and his proviso was you only homestead as long as there's good and sufficient other land. We libertarians reject that. We don't uphold the Lockean proviso. Hopefully, we will uphold the Blockian proviso. Okay, the next thing on my list is, do property rights go up to the heavens above? Now, there is this thing. I need another sheet of paper here. There is this thing called the ad coelum doctrine. What's the ad coelum doctrine? Ad coelum. The ad coelum doctrine is here is the earth, and here is a square mile. And according to the ad coelum doctrine, you own down into the core of the earth, and you own up into the heavens. Ad coelum doctrine says, think of an ice cream cone, goes down and then up, and you own where the ice cream is. Well, we libertarians reject the ad coelum doctrine because we think, or at least I think, I should have said that libertarianism is the philosophy that if you get 10 people in a room, 10 libertarians, you'll get 11 different views on everything. So I'm just giving my own views. I can't speak for all libertarians, but these are my libertarian views. My libertarian views is the ad coelum doctrine is invalid because we libertarians, or at least libertarians of my ilk, believe that the only legitimate way to get to own something is to mix your labor with it. But you haven't mixed your labor with something 4,000 miles below you, or with something 30,000 feet above you. You can see how the ad coelum doctrine would play havoc with air travel. I mean, the farmer says, oh, the airplane is passing over, give me $10. Well, you're not going to have much air travel if every time they pass over some farmer, they have to pay money. And the point is that the farmer didn't do anything 30,000 feet above, but the airplanes have. Yeah.
But what about mineral rights beneath the ground?
Okay, both. in both cases, you now own this square mile. And now we're over here, and this is, 100 yards below you. You haven't done anything. You're just a farmer, say. You haven't done anything. Therefore, slant drilling is okay. So what's slant drilling? Slant drilling is there are two people, A and B, and they both own land. And what A does is he goes below B's land and he starts grabbing oil or coal or diamonds or whatever it is, as long as he goes far down enough so that it doesn't cave in what B has, like if B has buildings or tree roots or something like that. So you get different levels of how high and how low you can go. For example, New York City is built on a rock. The whole thing is rock, miles down. So you can get pretty close under the next guy because you're not going to cave him in. On the other hand, New Orleans, where I'm a professor at Loyola, is built on a swamp. So you have to go way down below if you want to slant drill, because if you get a little close, you'll cave the other guy's buildings in. You'll be guilty of violating the non-aggression principle. Okay, so whether we go up or down, you only own what you homestead, and you don't homestead 30,000 feet above, nor do you homestead 2 miles below, unless you're a mineral person, and then you do, and then you can own that stuff. Okay. So how does an anarchic society control airspace? Homesteading. He who uses it first is the owner of it. There are airplane companies, Air Canada. Well, they're a government entity, so they really can't own anything because government, I'm an anarchist, so government is criminal gang because they tax people, and we have a word for taking money from people against their will called theft, so they're an illegitimate group. But American Airlines, Alaska Airlines, Delta, whatever, are at least quasi-private, and they own the right to go 30,000 feet above us because they've homesteaded that land by going back and forth. Now, right now, it's a scarce good. It's a non-scarce good. We've got room for more airplanes. And you can't have property rights unless it's scarce, but it's getting scarce, and pretty soon it will be scarce. And then the people that have been flying around up there are the ones that have a right to keep flying there. And if you want to start up a new airplane company, you have to buy the rights from those guys. Okay, the next thing, if the speech is no good, blame Don because he gave me the, I'm kidding. Okay. What about stupid signs overhanging my property or irritating air blimps or an overhanging tree? Again, we don't go by ad colon, we go by homesteading. Now, I think the rule is that if there's an apple tree that overhangs your property and apples fall on your property, you can grab them, but you can't pick them off the other guy's tree because he owns it, even though it's above. It depends on who was there first. If the tree was there first, you only own the land subject to the tree being there first. On the other hand, if you were there first and you were using that area, well, then you get the apple trees. Yeah.
What if the tree's roots are on your property?
It all depends upon who got there first. First in time, first in ownership. So take a noise pollution for a minute. Here is an airport, and it's 1 square mile. And they have noise all over the place. And now somebody comes and puts a house over here and says, hey, I'm going to sue you for making noise. The airplane company would say, well, look, we not only homesteaded this square mile, but we homesteaded the noise rights for 2 miles or 3 miles outside of the airport. So the Libertarian court would say, tough. On the other hand, if he was there first, and then the airport came, he would have to buy them out. And you get that case with the supersonic thing, the plane with the funny-looking nose, Concorde, which was much noisier than the previous ones. And I think the government courts decided that correctly. Namely, they said, you only homesteaded regular noise. You didn't homestead Concord noise. So you have to buy everyone out. And it's pretty hard to buy out 10,000 people. So they said you can't use it unless you're right on the ocean where the fish, what is it, the deer and the antelope play, or the fish play, or whatever. So you could use that kind of a plane if you're having an ocean, if you're going over the ocean and only making noise over the ocean. Which assumes that the owner of the ocean doesn't own it, but I'll get into that later. Okay, the next thing is, do property rights go to hells below? If not, how far down do they go? I've already answered that. Namely, it goes as far down as you've homesteaded. How are property rights enforced in anarchism? Okay, so here we have a situation where we have 5 people. We have A, B, C, D, and E. And A and E get into a squabble. Whatever the squabble is, he hit me first, I know you hit me first, or I sent you 100 pigs and I only got 90 and 10 of them were sick, and we're having a commercial interaction or a crime has been committed, some sort of arbitration, some sort of dispute between A and E, between Al and Ed, say. Okay, so A goes to B, the B court, and invites E to come to the B court. And he says, what, B? He's your brother. I'm not going to that court. That's crazy. Come to Dave's court. And A says, what? Go to Dave's court? Dave is your brother-in-law or your father or your son or whatever. I'm not going there. So each one goes to his own court. A goes to the B court, E goes to the D court. Now, when you go to court, what you do is you sign some sort of agreement that you'll abide by the decision. You post a bond that'll make you agree. The court has a police force, a private police force. So there are only 4 possibilities. Both A goes to B and says E is a dirty rat, and B could agree with A, and D could agree with E. That's one possibility. Another possibility is D could agree with A and B could agree with E. Another possibility. A third possibility is they both agree with A or they both agree with E. Now that's the easiest one. If they both agree with A, well then case closed. Because each one agreed to be bound by the decision, and A said that B was right and D said that that A was right. So, or they both agree with E. So let's forget about that problem of where they each disagree with their own client or their own buddy. And let's suppose that A agrees with B and E agrees with D. Now what? Ayn Rand says at this point, does anyone know the words, 2 words she uses? Not F-U, blank out. She uses the word blank out. She says, well, anarchists have no answer to that question. Well, here's the answer. And the answer comes from Murray Rothbard and David Friedman, not Milton Friedman, but David Friedman, Milton Friedman's son. And what they both say is there are 2 kinds of courts. There are legitimate courts and bandit courts. The legitimate courts have anticipated this beforehand. They all agree that sometime we might have different decisions on a case. And if we do, we're going to go to C, Charlie. We'll go to the Charlie court. And we, A and E, have signed a contract with each other, binding ourselves to saying, if ever we're on opposite sides of a decision, we'll go to C. It doesn't have to be C. It could be a random number of 10 or 15 other courts, but just we'll go to somebody else. And that'll be the Supreme Court. That'll be the final decision. So those are the regular courts or the legitimate courts or the licit courts. But then you have illegitimate courts or bandit courts. The bandit courts say, well, my way or the highway, whatever I say is right, and the hell with you. Well, the bandit courts are going to have to fight other bandit courts if they come to a different decision, and they're going to have to fight legitimate courts. The legitimate courts are only going to have to fight bandit courts. And there is this thing that the pen is mightier than the sword. There is this thing called, here's a pen, it's this big, a sword is that big. You'd think that a sword would beat the pen, but no, the pen determines which direction the sword is pointed. So there is this thing called legitimacy. And most people are going to say, well, look, legitimate courts have agreed to a process such that, we'll get justice done. Will we get justice done perfectly? No. We're on the wrong side of the Garden of Eden. But it's a system where we'll get things done in a legitimate way, in a way that most people can acknowledge is legitimate. So the implication is that the bandit courts will tend to disappear if they start in the first place, which is very doubtful. So that would be my answer to the question of how are private property rights enforced in anarchism? Through private courts. And this is the way the private courts would work. Yeah, Paul?
Disagreements about homesteading.
Can't hear you.
What about disagreements about homesteading?
Disagreement about anything. Look, A and E have a disagreement. A thinks he homesteaded the property, and E thinks he's the homesteader. Whatever the dispute is.
A method of, it could be disagreements about a method of homesteading.
Well,
when Europeans came to British Columbia, natives were living here, but the Europeans didn't accept the native methods of homesteading, and they created a brand new system.
Well, that's a whole other issue. Do we have to give all the land back to the Indians issue? So let me talk about that rather than this.
But it's about homesteading.
Well, yeah, but it doesn't matter what the dispute is about. Whatever the dispute is about, you settle it in this way. But since you raised it, let me talk about that problem. Do we own everything back to the Indians? Now, I'm not sure about the Canadian numbers, statistics, so let me give you the American ones. Right now in the U.S., there are 330 million people. And if you take a plane, even east of the Mississippi, the place is empty. At night, you can see the lights. And, there's Atlanta over here, and there's New Orleans there, and, there's St. Louis, but the place is pretty empty. You go west of the Mississippi, the place is totally empty, except for Denver and maybe Albuquerque or something. Nobody there. Mm-hmm. The place is bloody empty, and there are 330 million people. It's empty. Do you know how many Indians there were when the white man came? The best estimate is 2 million. 2 million? They can't own the whole country. I don't care how they homestead. I don't care. And they had a very wide definition of homesteading. You sort of look over there and you own it. I'm sorry? Being nomadic. Well, you see, what the Indians had was they'd have like a northern area of 10 square miles, and then they'd have a southern area of 10 square miles, and that's all they had. And only 2 million of them couldn't get to own anything appreciable. So, nowadays what they do is in Canada, they ask some old Indian, well, how much do you own? He says, the moon, the sun, the stars, we own everything we can see. But they didn't homestead any of that, or rather, they didn't homestead most of that. They homesteaded a little bit. Yeah, they had 10 square miles here, and they had 10 square miles there, and they have a path, and there are, 100 tribes. And the U.S. is empty, and I think Canada was even emptier, but I'm not sure of that. But we don't own everything back to the Indians, based on libertarian theory. Okay, let me move on. Should anarchic property rights be thought of as a different and limited legal system, or is there a better way to describe it? Is it just new law without the state? Well, I just think it's libertarian law. That would be my answer to that. Does anarchy create a justice that transcends voluntary legal systems? Well, by anarchy, I'm talking about libertarian anarchy. There are left-wing anarchists. There's Chomsky, Noam Chomsky, who was a great linguist. And I think he's pretty good on foreign policy and pretty good on personal liberties, but he's a little weak on economics. He believes that money per se is a violation of rights, whereas money is just an intermediary of exchange. Yeah.
I guess where I was trying to go with that question. So you have your A through E courts or individuals up there, and so let's take your solution, which is that they go to C. If they disagree, they go up to C. it's possible having a private court system that delivers a judgment that is not consistent with libertarian property rights and says, I like the way your shoes look. It goes your way. You've got a pragmatic solution that I don't know. Are they then wrong? In that society, is it then wrong to field an army and overthrow C, even though some people volunteer to participate in it? Because they're not libertarians anymore, so they need to be shut down or put aside.
It's always possible to say the judge said X, but is X libertarian?
Yeah.
But who is likely to be the C? Who is likely to be Charlie? See, right now, who are the judges? They're politicians. In Canada, you give up your seat to the leader of the party and you get to be a judge or something like that. The people who would become the Cs would be people who are trusted to give reasonable decisions. I have a buddy of mine, he's a professor of electrical engineering at Stanford. And a lot of companies mention him, high-tech companies, and they say, look, if ever we get into a dispute, we're going to go to this professor at Stanford and let him settle it. Because in the past, he settled it in a way that even if you lost, you see the coherence of what he's saying. Look, perfection is denied us. We're going to have injustice under libertarianism. But, another joke. You better laugh at this one or you're in trouble. The Economist was asked, how is your wife? The answer was, compared to what? Well, libertarian justice is not perfect, but compared to what? Compared to, the present, compared to the present political statism, I think it's going to be much better. It won't be perfect. There might be cases where C, no matter how well thought of he is because of previous cases, makes a mistake. But the process is a reasonable process, probably the best process we can come up with.
So I gotta say, I'm taking a little issue with the libertarian position on mineral rights. I happen to work in the oil and gas industry, and in Canada, the government grants mineral rights. So anything 6 feet under the ground or deeper is granted to the government, and so they issue leases to corporations to go get those resources, and then the surface rights are handled on an individual property rights issue, right? So if an oil company talks to a farmer and says, we want to drill a well, how would you like us to align the road and everything to get access to that? But everything below it is out of the hands of the farmer.
Well,
but in some cases, there are laws grandfathered in, like in Alberta, they do have, in lands that were homesteaded 100 years ago, they do have mineral rights. And so the landowner negotiates directly with the oil company and says, if you want to drill here, we'll grant you a lease and you'll pay us a certain amount per month to everything that's under the subsurface rights of the ground.
Or we'll sell it to you.
Or we'll sell it to you.
It doesn't have to be a lease. It could be a sale. My point is that the farmer doesn't own stuff 1,000 yards below him. And if the mineral company is there first, the mineral company owns it and doesn't have to pay the farmer squat.
Other than the surface rights.
No, well...
the access to it.
Let me talk. I have, later on, another question comes up on, where is it, about roads. Will there be public parks in an anarchic society? I like strolling in the park. Somewhere in here about roads. I have a book on roads. Let me whip it out here. The Privatization of Roads and Highways.
Okay.
And the reason I'm going to... Look, I'm a professor. I'm never allowed to answer any question directly. So I have to do it circuitously. So, if I don't know the answer, I'll come up with a different question and answer that. And hopefully it'll be close enough. Okay, so I have this book on roads, and my motivation for writing this book on roads, we should privatize all roads, privatize Columbia Street, privatize the interstate or interprovincial I-1, whatever it is, privatize all roads. And I have two motivations for that. one motivation is, do you know how many people die on the highways in the US and Canada?
Thousands.
35 to 40,000 in the US, and about 3,500 to 4,000 in Canada. It's about 1/10. And this is horrible. I mean, there were these 10 kids in, where was it? Some country in East Asia that were in this cave. Thailand. 10 kids in a stinking lousy 10 kids. And everybody's upset that they might die because they're in a cave. Or some little girl gets lost in a well and everybody, drops everything. As they should, because every life is precious. But 35,000 to 40,000 people die on the roads and nobody says squat. The reason is somehow we think that the government should own all the roads. My second motivation for that is I was coming down the cut in North Van on the way here, and I was going about 2 miles an hour. Congestion. I mean, traffic congestion is horrible. And what I'm saying is that if we had private roads, we would have fewer deaths, many fewer deaths, and no traffic congestion. Why is that? Why might we have fewer deaths? Well, right now, on most major highways, here are 3 lanes, A, B, and C. Isn't that artwork great? Thank you. And the minimum speed in the U.S. is 40, and the maximum is 70. And if you do 70, people go right by you. Maybe, just maybe, a better way to do it is to have everyone goes 50 here, 65 here, and 80 there. Do you think that would work better? I have no idea. But it might. All I know as an economist is the reason we have pretty good shirts and pretty good eyeglasses and pretty good pens, except for the red ones that you can't see, but what the heck, you can't have everything, because of competition. If somebody doesn't make a good pen or a good shirt or a good wristwatch or a good eyeglass, they tend to go broke, and that's why the burgers are pretty good. Not perfect, but pretty good. Whereas in other countries like Venezuela or Cuba, they're not as good because you don't have competition. So what I'm saying is if I owned a road and I tried this and it worked and your road was different, I would steal your customers away and eventually you'd have to replicate me and we'd have not 50 states or 10 or 12 provinces, 10 provinces and a few territories. We'd have as many road owners as there were different entrepreneurs of roads. And we'd find a better way. Right now, if you're doing, the maximum is 70, and if you're doing 68 over here, everybody starts going around you. And when you change lanes, that's more dangerous. So what I would do if I owned the road, I'd say, look, you got to do 80 here. And if you do 68, I'm going to, be miffed. Another one is, here are 2 lanes, and here are 2 trucks. One truck right behind the other, and you know this guy is going to come out and try to pass, and it's going to take him 15 minutes to pass because the trucks are going to have a race, and you're over here in a little car, so what you do is you speed up to about 95, right, to get ahead. Well, on my road, I would say, let this truck pass you for God's sakes, and if you hold up everybody with your stupid truck race, I'm going to give you a big fine. And what I'm saying is people will compete to make the road safer. My estimate is that instead of 40,000 people dying on the road, about 10,000 people would die, because I extrapolated, I compared costs of things where the government and the private do the same thing, like garbage collection or mail delivery, and the government is usually 3 or 4 times less efficient. So I'm assuming that there'll be maybe 10,000 people dying even with private roads, which isn't perfect, but it's better. The second one is congestion, traffic congestion. The idea here is we now have a situation where here is quantity of traffic and here is time. And what you have is a morning rush hour from, 8 till 10, and then a little less from 9 till 4, and then at 4 to 6 it gets much higher, and then lower, right? Peak loads, and what we have is a thing called peak load pricing. that people would do if there was private ownership. Namely, you charge a lot during this time, and the traffic will come down, and the traffic will come down here, and maybe it'll go a little higher. You might not get even traffic throughout the day, but you'll get less oscillations if we had peak load. Look, the Grouse Mountain charges a lot more during the winter, but they charge something during the summer. But in New Orleans, where I come from, they charge a lot more in the winter than in the summer because in the summer it's pretty warm there. In the winter it's pretty nice. So come on down in the winter if you want to come down. So this would be a way of doing it. There's this guy Bob Poole from Reason, and what he does is he consults with governments to get them to do that. And I regard that as being an efficiency expert for the state. And we don't want the state roads to be better. We want to privatize them. Now, if the government reads this book about, peak load pricing, can't stop them. And it would be nice if they did that. But, I'm not going to be a consultant for government because that's sort of selling out. Okay, so now to get to your question.
I just wanted to add that the reason why the peaks exist in the first place is because of public schools all having the same start time.
One is not only public schools, but also most companies start from 8 to 4. Well, now if you had this, what you would have, see, what the government says is, everybody carpool or take a bus and everyone ignores them. But if the price were high enough, we would naturally carpool, or we would naturally use a big conveyance like a bus or something like that. The companies would adjust. Some would start from 9 to 5, others 8 to 4, some from 7 to 3, others from 10 to 6 or whatever. So they'd spread it out if the price were high enough. And if it weren't high enough, you raise it a little more. That's why we don't have any shortages of anything, because prices adjust. Okay, now to get to your question. Do we need eminent domain, or what do they call it in Canada? Expropriation? Okay, so here we go. We're in Vancouver, and we want to build a road to Toronto. And how many people own land between here and there? I don't know, a couple of 100,000 different farmers and different people own land. And my favorite cartoon character is Cartman from South Park. And Cartman owns some land right over here. And what is Cartman's favorite saying? Screw you guys, screw you guys, screw you guys. So Cartman is a holdout. We want to build the road as the crow flies, and Cartman's sitting right there. So do we need expropriation on the part of the government, or don't we? I'm getting closer to your question. I'll get there in about 5 minutes. It takes me a while. Well, one way out of this is we don't need a straight line. We could go this way or that way or this way or that way. We could buy options. You know what an option is? An option is you go to a farmer over here and you say, look, we might want to buy your land, and the offer is $10,000 an acre, but we're not sure that we want to buy your land, but we'll let you know within 2 years, and for the privilege of letting us decide whether we want to buy it or not, we'll pay you $1,000 now. And the farmer says yes, and if we get everybody on that road, then we build the road that way. But Cartman owns this. Cartman owns a piece of land 20 miles high and a mile wide. So now what do we do with Cartman? Do we need the government to say, hey, Cartman, be reasonable? No. We can do two things. One, we can build a bridge over his land or a tunnel under. Tunnel under means he doesn't own that stuff down there. So I'm finally getting back to your question. Now, if he owns that stuff, then we need the government if we're going to have roads. But I don't like that. Fudging. I know the right answer is we don't need government for anything. But we have the holdout problem. So how are we going to deal with that? Well, you go over or under. Now we have to talk about football. Here is a football thingy, and here's the end zone. People who know about football know that if the ball is here, I should make it like a football, it's much easier to score because you have a whole area to operate in. Whereas if the football is here, it's harder to you have a goal line stand, right? It's harder because you have very little land to work on. So now the question comes, well, Cartman is not a dummy. He knows that we're going to build under or a bridge over. So what he does is he starts putting sticks way down. My son and I discussed this problem for about 2 years, from the age 15 to about age 17, and then I wrote it up and I made him a co-author because I believe in bending over backwards. And what he said is, no one would believe that I'm the co-author. I said, but is it true? He said, well, of course it's true. We've discussed practically nothing else but this. So the article that he and I wrote is in this book. And then we had, what's Buchanan's buddy? Gordon Tullock, who wrote an essay saying that the blocks were full of beans, and we wrote an article saying, no, Gordon Tullock is full of beans, debating this sort of an issue. The point is, how wide is a road? A road is 6 lanes, 10 feet each. That's 30 feet, 60 feet, 40 feet in between, 100 feet. Cartman has to defend 15 miles. All we have to do is get that road through. So no matter how deep his sticks are, he's got to put sticks for 15 miles. All we have to do is get 150 feet through. So we don't need the government. We don't need expropriation. We don't need eminent domain, but only if you're wrong. Only if Cartman doesn't own anything below him. If he owns, if what do you call it? If ad column is correct, and you can't have slant drilling, well then we can't have roads either. So we know that's wrong, but now we have to come up with a reason. It's not just enough to fudge and say, well, here's the right answer. The reason is Cartman never homesteaded stuff a quarter mile down. And the company, the mineral company, did, so they're the owner. Okay, let me move along. If a bully steals my friend's property, I guess, am I justified in using force to get it back from him, even if the bully thinks our property rights are just silly ideas? Yeah, the hell with the bully. We're libertarians. We believe that if somebody initiates violence, you can help the victim, whether it's your friend or your wife or your child or a stranger. Yeah, bash smack him in the nose because he's violating rights. You're in the right.
I have a question about that.
Shoot.
What if you pardon?
I can't hear you.
What if you are the property owner and you pardon the theft? Just you have the right to.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
If you pardon the theft,
You are the only one.
Say it again.
what if you pardon the theft? So someone steals from you and you
yes.
say,
I'm the victim. He smacked me, and we weren't in a boxing ring. But I'm a pacifist. The crime is committed against me, not against the state or against the rest of you. He just punched me. But I'm a pacifist. I say, you're a bad guy, but I forgive you. No penalty.
If the friend smacks his face, then it's a crime.
So a bully, I'm your buddy, and a bully smacks you, and you forgive him, well, then I can't do anything to the bully because there's no crime. It's as if he's a masochist. Right? In effect, a pacifist is a masochist. He says, turn the other cheek or hit me again. Then I can't attack the bully because he's forgiven him. Of course, I might not know that, and I see him hitting my buddy, and I smack him, I'm in the right. I didn't know.
Well, because only the victim has the right.
Yeah.
If you smack the face,
But
the
it's-
guy was pardoned or part of a play, you cannot.
Yeah.
You
But-
have to be aggressive. Okay?
Look, what's your name?
Nicole.
Nicole is about to be hit by a truck, and I push her out of the way of the truck, and I break her ribs. Am I a criminal? No, even though it seems as if I violated her rights. I mean, I hauled off and pushed her, which without the truck there, I would be a criminal. That would be assault and battery, but the context was clear. So the context is very important. Okay, the next one is, what if people who don't agree with property rights are stronger than me and my other property owning friends? Are we inevitably weaker against invasion without the forced collectivization of the state? Very, very good criticism or challenge. Look, if we we're in Monaco, and how many people are in Monaco? 100,000. And France is 20 million or 50 million. If it's a fight between French statists and us libertarians from Monaco, we're probably going to lose because, they got 50 million people and we got 100,000. In economics, there's this thing called ceteris paribus, other things equal. Other things equal, we'll do pretty well against someone our own size. I weigh 180 pounds. I'm not going to fight somebody 250. We're not in the same weight division. But I might do pretty well against somebody equal. We have an aphorism in environmental economics. I teach a course in that. It's called wealthier is healthier. The richer you are, the better the environment can be because you can afford to keep the environment safe. If you're on the verge of starvation and you're not going to live till tomorrow unless you cut down this tree, you're going to cut down the tree. Well, not only is wealthier healthier, wealthier is also safer. The richer we are, other things equal, the more powerful we are, the more able we are to resist bad guys, whether bullies or armies. And how do you get rich? How do you get prosperous? Libertarianism, free enterprise, private property rights, the usual thing. So we do pretty well. Now, there is this country in Africa, which is the one that's anarchistic? Somalia. And everyone says, oh, Somalia is anarchistic, and they're not, their GDP is much, per capita, is much lower than Canada. Well, yeah. But if you compare Somalia with the other countries near Somalia, Somalia starts to look pretty good.
Or the Somalia formerly with the government?
Well, it previously had a government, but now it's got warring clans or something like that. But they're doing pretty well compared to the other countries. So what I'm saying is if we had a small country of libertarians and a gigantic country of non-libertarians, we're toast. But you can't have everything. I mean, we could do people twice as big as us because we're libertarian, but not 10,000 times bigger than us because the sheer weight of numbers. Yeah.
Or you could develop technology and crush them.
Well, yeah. Well, look at Israel. Israel's got 10 million, and the Arabs have got 100 million or
Like 250 million.
250 million around them, and the Israelis are smarter. And nowadays they're more free enterprise also. Although the way Israel started, it wasn't that free enterprise, but now it's much more free enterprise. So you're quite right. Although still, there are limits to the technology. They could have technology too, or they could wear us down because we've only got 100,000 people, and they've got many, many more. So we mow them down, but we still lose. So you have to look at the context. Okay, the next thing is, how do you sue somebody who hasn't agreed to your legal system? I've sort of covered that with my A, B, C, D, E. The hell with them. They don't have to agree. I'm a rapist. I'm going to do my thing, and I don't agree with you guys about the sanctity of women's bodies. Well, pulverize me. I mean, might makes right. Not really, but in this case. We just got elected to government with 100% support. Wrong. If there was 100% support, it wouldn't be government. Government is defined as that entity that doesn't have 100% support. In the market, there's always 100%. I bought this watch for $20. There was unanimous agreement. And there were two of us. He agreed to sell it to me. I agreed to buy. The market is unanimous agreement. The government is not unanimous agreement. That's the problem with them. You have a majority vote, and then what happens to the minority? They don't agree, and yet they have to go along. They have to pay taxes, whatever. That's no good. If there is no state court, how do I get my neighbor to move his fence, which is rudely encroaching on my property? If I don't want to start a fight with him, he's bigger and stronger than me, and truthfully, I'm a weakling. I didn't know that about you. Well, I've sort of answered that one. You go to court and sue him. Does Hobby have it right about public property? Should it be turned into jointly held private property among net taxpayers? Here I have to get involved in a debate that I'm having with him over immigration. Paul gave an excellent talk a month ago. He favored free, open borders. I also favor free open borders. Where I diverge from Paul is Paul thinks that every immigrant is a great guy, or they're not as bad as the domestic people, or he emphasizes how good immigrants are. I think that some immigrants are not so good. There are rape refugees, people from Arab countries who think that if a woman is wearing a miniskirt or doesn't have a face covering, she's asking for it. That's their view. People like that, we don't want in this country. Then there are truck refugees. You know, the joke about this is somebody calls the suicide hotline, and they say, "Can you drive a truck?" Nobody gets it. Look, when an economist tells a joke, you laugh. It's sort of like when a bear rides a unicycle and plays the violin. You don't ask if he's in tune. You say, "Wow, a bear riding a unicycle, playing a violin. Whoa!" So it's sort of like when an economist tells a joke, you know, shut up and laugh. No, I'm kidding. Okay, so I think that there are very bad immigrants. We don't want people like that. And even nice people. We don't, I mean, India has 1 billion people. Do we really want 500 million Indians to come here? It'll change our country a lot, even if they don't vote. And if they vote, it'll change it a lot. It'll become more like India. Namely, they'll come here because it's so bad there, and they'll make here like there.
And wasn't it the original Friedman who said you can't have open borders if you have a welfare state?
Well, that was Milton Friedman. And my answer to that is get rid of the welfare state. Because immigration per se is not a violation of rights. Here's the situation. I'm an immigrant. I come from Mars or India or China or Africa, wherever I come from. I come by boat and I start homesteading right at the tip of Alaska where there's nobody homesteaded ever. It's virgin territory. Or I have a little helicopter and I go in the middle of, Wyoming in the Rocky Mountains where nobody has ever been before. And I start homesteading. Did I violate rights? No. Hans Hoppe, my opponent on this debate, says, well, we all own middle of Wyoming, or we all own the middle of Alaska, we all own the middle of the Northwest Territories. No. If you're going to stick, and Hoppe is one of the most foremost theoreticians of homesteading, but here I think he's violating his principles. That guy who's homesteading, and I don't care how many of them there are, is not violating rights. So anyone who kicks him out is violating rights because he's peacefully homesteading virgin territory, stuff untouched by anyone. So how do we have our cake and eat it? How do we adhere to libertarian theory and also keep safe? The answer is, let's homestead everything, every square inch. Now, it's true there are some sub-marginal lands in the middle of Alaska, in the middle of the Northwest Territories that nobody wants. Homestead them anyway. Do it as a public benefit. Everybody go out there and start homesteading. Now, look, if you homestead east of the Mississippi in the U.S., you have to homestead intensively. You have to put a corn plant every foot or every yard. If you homestead west of the Mississippi, a little less because it's arid. East of the Mississippi is more fertile. West of the Mississippi, just 5 plants every acre. If you want to homestead in the Sahara Desert, much more open. If you want to homestead on Moon or the Mars, much more. So you don't have to put a plant every inch in Alaska, but you have to do something. So let's all go out there and do something. And then if they come, they'll be trespassing, and they can't come. The Prime Minister of, I'm Jewish, the Prime Minister of Canada in around 1936, 37, was faced with a boat of Jewish people, and he was asked, well, how many will you allow into Canada? He said, none is too many. When I first heard that, I'm Jewish, I thought, wow, that's not good. But then I started thinking, Jews are horrible. They're a bunch of commies. I mean, yes, there's Milton Friedman and there's Friedrich Hayek and there's me and then Rothbard, not that I'm putting myself in that category. We're all Jewish. But most Jews are a bunch of commies. They're union leaders, they're socialists, they're pinkos, they're horrible. Who wants them? I wouldn't want them.
A lot of them philosophers.
I'm sorry?
And philosophers.
And philosophers too, yes. But the point is that if they go to Montreal, they're a pain in the neck. But if they go out where nobody homesteaded, then the Prime Minister of Canada would not be justified in stopping them. And if we had private roads, they couldn't get around as civilized people. Now, where I have another dispute with Hans is, well, what about Stanley Park? Suppose somebody from Mars or the moon or India or China or Africa, whatever, came and started homesteading in the middle of Stanley Park. Now here I think Hans has got a better case. I think my case is irrefutable when it's virgin land. Stanley Park is not virgin land, but who owns it? Do we own it? Well, I don't know. The example I use against Hans is I'm now a resistance fighter against the Nazis, and I break into a Nazi garage, and I'm about to put gasoline over all the cars and trucks and tanks, and then light them all up and blow them all up. And somebody, Don, comes and says, hey, that's my truck. Don't blow up that truck. And I say, it's not your truck, it's the Nazis' truck. They took it from you. Namely, it's not our Stanley Park. They took it from us through taxes or whatever we paid for, and the streets that we paid for. So here I think Hans got a better point, but it's I still think I'm right, but I acknowledge he's got a better point.
Could it be argued that your point of view with homesteading being the be-all, end-all of libertarian theory would apply to an earlier time, let's say the 18th or 19th century, when we actually had pioneers showing up at the New World, when countries and counties and states and provinces hadn't been established already, whereas Hans Hoppe's point of view is this is the world today, and so to operate within that framework, to move in that direction.
I reject that. In my view, rights are timeless. The caveman had just as much right not to be murdered as the present man, and the present man has just as much right not to be murdered as the spaceman 10,000 years from now. Rights are the same no matter what epoch we're in. So I reject the notion that somehow things are different. Yes, property rights were okay 100 years ago, but not now. I think libertarianism is timeless. Rights are rights are rights, and we don't have to look at the date to see if the rights are still relevant.
So in the case of Stanley Park, let's say I'm wealthy, I own all that land, I manicured it and allowed for public use. I die, I will it to state or whatever to continue use for public use. How would we deal with that?
Well, if Barbra Streisand used to donate money to the government more than the taxes that she was required to pay, she's a criminal. You donate stuff to the government, you're a criminal. The government is a robber gang. You might as well donate it to the Mafia or the Blood or the Crips or MS-13 or whatever the gang is. Government is a criminal. They're a criminal gang. You shouldn't be donating anything to them. But look, if I own Stanley Park, I might put a few high-rises in there, but I would also make it so that people would want to come, and I would charge money for them to come. Grouse Mountain is, I think, private. I'm not sure if it's privately owned. I think it is. Then there's Seymour. We can have private parks. One of the questions that Don asks is, will there be public parks in the anarchic society? I like strolling in the park. I like taking long hikes in the forest. No, there'll be no public parks, but there'll be private ones. Other people like taking strolls, and you pay for it. You might as well say, well, will there be shoes in the free market? Look, suppose government was in charge of making shoes, and only government made shoes. And now we have freedom. Does that mean there'll be no shoes? No, private people will make shoes. It's difficult to say what color the shoes will be, or will they have laces or not, or will there be sneakers or high heels, or what the proportions are. But we'll have shoes. So yeah, we'll have parks.
Stanley Park, in fact, started as a private park.
Oh, really?
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
The Guinness family built the bridge and started the park. It was
They
a
gave it
private
to the
park.
city. They donated to the city.
Well, they're a bunch of statists. Okay, I'm almost finished with this, and then we'll have more questions and discussion. I'm just about finished with the outline here. So we just got elected to government with 100% support. What do we do with the roads and public parks? Privatize them. My motto is, if it moves, privatize it. If it doesn't move, privatize it. Since everything either moves or doesn't move, privatize everything. I've got 3 books on that. One is Privatize Roads. The next one is Privatize Oceans, Rivers, and Lakes. And the third one, I didn't bring, I have them back in my office. Privatize the space race. Privatize the trip up there, and then privatize land on the Mars and on the moon. So I'm a big fan of privatizing. Are the technical challenges to that so significant that they make it impossible? I don't think that there are any technical challenges that make free enterprise impossible. Are we going back to confederation? I'm not sure about where we're going. Justin is now prime minister. I don't know who's good. We got this guy who wants to be a libertarian. What's his name? Maxime Bernier. I don't know. I really can't predict what's going to happen in Canadian politics. I can say what I'd like to see, namely, Bill Buckley was once came to Canada to give a lecture, and at the border they asked him, "What's your purpose to come to Canada?" And he said, "To desocialize Canada." Well, he failed. My friend Guido Holtzman got a job in Lyon, some French university 10 years ago. I'm sorry?
Probably Laval.
No, not Laval. Some French, and I gave him 10 years, and I said, look, if France isn't free enterprise in 10 years, you're a bum. And he's a bum.
Mike, that question was more, was supposed to be a sub-question of the question about Hoppe. So I think you distinguished your view from Hoppe. Hoppe was saying we need to divide essentially the roads and public assets among net taxpayers. So what, then you don't see it that way. What exactly do we do with the roads that are right now are public? They're not private. How do we to whom do we transfer these, and what's that process of privatization?
What's the process of privatization?
Yeah.
The process of privatization is if we had a God's eye view, we would give it to the people whose taxes made it. We don't have a God's eye view, so we do the next best thing, and we give it to the people. In this book, what I talk about is who gets to own the Mississippi River. Well, what we do is we say anyone who's used the Mississippi River gets 1 share. So all the people who have boats going up and down, depending on how many boats, maybe 1 share per boat. And then all the people who own land along the side of the Mississippi River, because we assume they've used the Mississippi River. And now you have the Mississippi River Corporation, which consists of 10,000 shares, 1 share to different people, 5 shares to somebody. And now it's a corporation, and they run the Mississippi River. By the way, I was in New Orleans during Katrina. Katrina missed us by 40 miles. 1,900 people got killed there. Why? Because the Army Corps of Engineers, their levees fell. Now, the humanist in me says, that's horrible. 1,900 people died. The economist in me says, this is horrible because they're still in business. Whereas if any private company owned the Mississippi River and killed 1,900 people, somebody else would own the Mississippi River, and we'd have, not perfection, but we'd have an improvement. Look, if McDonald's killed 1,900 people, that would be it for McDonald's. We'd go to Burger King or Wendy's or Taco Bell or whatever it is. The reason we go to McDonald's is, they're pretty good. Not perfect, pretty good. So, by the way, I revere Hans Hoppe. He is one of the greatest libertarian theoreticians ever. Not just today, but ever. But we disagree. You can't win them all. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe he's wrong. I've challenged him to a debate. Hans, you want a debate? I've challenged him to a debate on this, and so far I haven't heard from him, which is interesting. You know, we libertarians disagree on a lot of things, like abortion. Ron Paul, you can't get a more highly credentialed libertarian than Ron Paul is pro-life. Murray Rothbard, can't get a more credentialed libertarian than Murray Rothbard, pro-choice. We disagree. I have a new book coming out showing why they're both wrong. The evictionist theory. Some of you have heard of that. Maybe I'll go into that during the questions, but I want to finish this now. Will there be public parks? Yes. Is the state still unjust if its only function would be to enforce anarchic property law? If its only function would be to enforce anarchic property law, it wouldn't be a state. It would be a private defense agency. If they strictly got their money from clients, willing clients, they wouldn't be a state. I reserve the word state or government for a group that doesn't do that demands money against your will. So I'm now finished with the write-up, and now we can have more questions, discussion, whatever. Paul.
I just want to go back to that homesteading thing. Aren't there some resources that are just too expensive to homestead, or too expensive to make sure that other people don't come into your or invade your herd? I'm thinking about fish or wild animals or even smoke in the air.
Well, this book makes the case. One of the things, you know, Star Trek, the one where our boys in the 23rd century were getting the crap kicked out of them by the boys in the 26th century because there were no whales.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And then the boys in the 23rd century, our Captain Kirk and the guy with the pointy ears had to come to the 20th century to get whales. Why were there no whales? Tragedy of the commons. When you own something in common, you don't take care of it, it's pretty much unowned. That's why we're running out of whales, we're running out of fish. There was a debate between two guys on, are we running out of resources? One was Julian Simon, the other was Paul Ehrlich. Paul Ehrlich was the commie, Julian Simon was our guy. And what they agreed to is they had a market basket of goods. I forget what, tungsten and turnips and 4 or 5 other things. And they agreed that if the price went up, we're running out of resources, up relative to a price index. And if the price went, don't we go until 8?
Yeah, they might be doing a sound check. Want to go knock them out?
Beat them up.
Okay.
Punch them. We had a deal. No, we had a
We
contract.
started speaking before they started playing the guitar. So.
Hey, now I see you. Good to see you. I have a very weak voice, so it's hard for me to go over guitar music. What were we talking about? Whales, right. So anyway, Paul Ehrlich lost the bet and Julian Simon won the bet. So then Paul Ehrlich says, well, let's have another bet about fish. And he was saying that we're going to run out of fish. And then Julian Simon said, well, can we count farm fish? And then Julian Simon was not a total dummy. He said, well, forget about that bet. The point is, farm fish were up to our armpits in fish. You know, most fish disappear. You know, we get 1% of the fish, but farm fish, we get 98% of the fish. So we're never going to run out of fish because it's farm fish. I have to draw you another picture. Are they going to stop?
He's doing a sound check. He's bigger than me. I don't know what to do. I asked him to keep it short, so I thought.
Was he nice about it, or did it?
No, he was nice about it. Yeah.
Here are 2 animals. Here is a cow, and here is a buffalo. As far as I can see, I'm going to draw the cow happy because, notice the artwork, because he never went extinct. Horns. And here is a buffalo, and I'm going to draw him unhappy because he almost went extinct. They're the same animal. I mean, you hit one, you're in trouble. They're both smelly. You know, they're about the same size. Why is it one almost went extinct and the other never came within 1 million miles of extinction? Because the cow was always privately owned. If you killed a cow, the cost to you was you don't have a cow tomorrow. If you killed a buffalo, the cost was you weren't going to have that buffalo anyway.
And the buffalo are coming back because they've been privatized.
And they are
Precisely,
privatized.
precisely. Well, as far as I'm concerned, whales are just, buffalo, and the same with the elephants and the rhinos. They say that the reason the elephants and the rhinos are going extinct is because the elephant tusk is worth, I think, $200 a pound, and the rhino is worth $200 an ounce. The tusk. The tusk is only 15 pounds, whereas the elephant is 120 pounds or something like that. They're worth $40,000, $50,000, but that's not why they're going extinct. The reason they're going extinct is they're not owned. So if they were owned, we would save them. And the same thing with alligators. The alligators are almost disappearing. In New Orleans, they eat alligators, the alligator soup, whatever. They were almost going extinct, and now they were allowed to be owned, and all of a sudden they're not going extinct. So when Paul says, well, aren't there some animals that aren't conducive to this? Well, there are some things that are not conducive to private property, and that's if they're not scarce. If they're not scarce, then we can't have property rights. But the oceans are becoming scarce. They're not scarce quite yet, and the air is getting more and more crowded for airplanes. Now, you mentioned pollution. As far as I can see, pollution is a trespass of smoke particles. I'm sending off smoke particles to other people, and they're getting into their lungs and onto their laundry on a clothesline before we had dryers and stuff like that. That's just a violation of rights. Let me tell you my pollution story. There was this little old lady in the 1830s, and she hung out her laundry, and it was wet and clean. She comes back 2 hours later, it's dry and dirty. So she goes to the court and says, I want two things. I want an injunction and I want damages. An injunction is a letter from the court saying if you do this again, we're putting you in jail for trespass, for property right violation. And damages is I want to be paid for, my stuff. Or there was a farmer who had haystacks, and the railroad came along with sparks 300 feet away, set his haystacks on fire, went to court, damages, injunction. In the 1830s in the U.S., I'm not familiar with Canadian law, sometimes they won. They didn't always win. The court wanted to see evidence. Innocent until proven guilty, which didn't occur with Brett Kavanaugh. We changed things around. But, the plaintiff, the burden of proof is on the plaintiff. But if the plaintiff can prove that there was an invasion, well then, yes, damages and an injunction. Was this perfect? No, but it was pretty good. People were led by an invisible hand to use anthracite coal, which was clean burning, even though it was expensive, rather than sulfur coal, which was dirty burning, but cheaper. Because if they used sulfur coal, some little old lady would haul them in a court. Let me just finish this, and then I'll call on you. So then what happened, we got into the progressive period in 1880, 1890, 1900, 1910. And the U.S. wanted to be number one then. Who was number one at that time? Great Britain. I got to get a drug. I use cough drops. Otherwise I lose my throat. These are just legitimate drugs here. So if the RCMP is, pot will be legal soon. So who knows? So we had a poor, what's his name, Mark Emery. He won't be allowed to use it because he broke the law. and all the people that were putting him in jail, they'll be able to get into the pot. Oh, horrible situation. So in the 1890s, the U.S. wanted to be number one. Great Britain was number one. How do you become number one? More battleships, more howitzers, things like that. So the next time some little old lady or farmer comes into court, we had a sea change in the law away from legitimate law. And they said, yeah, they're violating your property rights, your stinking, lousy, selfish private property rights. The public good is more important. And what's the public good? The public good is manufacturing. And they offered a SOP to the plaintiff, minimum smokestack height regulations. When the smokestack was 10 foot high, you could tell where the smoke was. When it's 200 feet high, you sweep it not under the rug, but into the clouds. And then we had to have the Clean Air Act because people are walking around with masks like it used to be in China. But that's the government's fault. So to answer Paul's question, I don't see pollution as a market failure, which most of the mainstream economists see it as. I see it as a government failure to uphold the law that they say that they're in charge of. So if we allow people to do this, we inherit the whirlwind. Another benefit, we have this thing called forensics, and you have all these shows, CSI, where they look in the blood and they look under the fingernails to see if the victim scraped the perpetrator's skin, and we look for semen and blood and all sorts of things. Well, we have environmental forensics, namely, where did this smoke thing come from? And in the 1830s, they were starting then to figure it out. And then in the 1890s, we stopped that. Okay, another question? Well, you've already had 3 shots, so I'm going to call on some other people. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to get your privatization of the rivers and the oceans. So I buy the I buy the sewers, I'm going to get rid of effluent. So I'm going to get rid of discharge into the river. So somebody's going to be privately own that river, and they're going to say, if you're going to discharge into this river, you can do it this way or this way or this way. Again, I guess it's the process of that privatization of that river. How does that happen so that we do get those naturally market-demanded regulations put in place?
Well, I don't think you're asking how do we get regulations put into place.
Well,
I think you're asking how do we get reasonableness or how do we get safety.
Well, it would be negotiated between 2 parties, right?
Yeah.
Then be contractual, I call it regulation, but that really,
Right.
you're right, it's not a good word.
Okay, so
Contractual.
here's the Mississippi River, and here's some guy who wants to get rid of sewage. Sure, take care. Well, will the Mississippi River... Let me answer this question indirectly. Forget about the Mississippi River and sewage. Let's talk about a highway. I own a highway, and you come with a gas-guzzling car. You see the analogy here.
Not yet.
Well,
It takes a while.
gas guzzling is effluent, and
Okay.
sewage is effluent, and the road and the highway look about the same. I'm more used to answering this in terms of cars. Do we sue every car owner? That's impossible, because there are millions of car owners. What we do is we sue the road owner for setting up a bawdy house of pollution. It's a lot easier, and if we had private roads, we could do that. Well, it's the same thing with sewage and the Mississippi River. We're the owners of the Mississippi River, and some guy wants to dump sewage in our river. See, when I owned that road and you had a real gas guzzler and created clouds, would I say you can't come? No. I would say, yeah, you can come, but I'm going to charge you an arm and a leg, which would tend to get you to get a catalytic converter. But I'll do a little bit because, there's this thing called the hockey stick in environmental economics.
It looks like the buffalo and cattle trapped in here.
Here is the hockey stick. This is quantity of pollution, and this is dollar value. The way the hockey stick goes, it sort of increases, and then it increases a lot. In other words, if you go from here to here, you're hardly going to notice it. So we get one catalytic, one lousy car, the heck. We get to this point, and all of a sudden, any addition is very, very harmful. So the road owner will allow a car or 2 or 3, and they'll charge them a ton of money. Would the owner of elephants allow a pregnant elephant to be shot? Sure, but the price is going to be very high. Whereas if you shoot a male elephant, the farmer keeps 50 cows in one bull, not 50 bulls in one cow. So men are superfluous. The feminists ought to be happy about that, I guess. So if you shoot a male elephant or a female who's too old, low price. You want to shoot a young female elephant? We'll let you, but you're going to pay a ton of money. Well, it's the same thing with pollution, of air pollution, and the same thing with sewage. We're going to charge you a lot of money for sewage, and what you're going to do when we charge you so much is you're going to get that sewage together before you send it to us, and you're going to clean it and take the bad part of it out and bury it somewhere, and the good part, which is 1% bad, we'll let it into our river because 1% bad, what the heck, that's over here. So that would be the answer to that question. We can have safety with private property. Yes, sir.
Considering the massive infrastructure of the state, where do we start to scale it back? What is our game plan be able to move that ball down?
Well, the game plan is to elect Ron Paul.
He's not running.
Or in Canada.
Well, to elect Tim Moen.
Yeah.
Or
That
to,
being said, the anarchists that are anti-voting and they're on the side of saying I don't vote at all, considering the fact that I'm contributing to the existence of the state, that's kind of a challenge, I guess. I feel like we're all on the same team trying to get things back on the other side.
well, not all anarchists are against voting. I favor voting. I started a group, Libertarians for Trump, and I got 5,000 signatures. Why? Remember that joke, how is your wife compared to what? Compared to Hillary? Donald was great. And he was a lot better when he was running than now because he had a lot of peace kind of, I'm friends with Russia, I'm friends with these guys, we have too many wars. So I started a thing, Libertarians for Trump. And then I started another one, Scholars for Trump, because the idea was that only redneck, stupid people would vote for Donald. Deplorables. Well, so I got professors, PhDs, lawyers, doctors, and I got 150 of them to sign up. So I favor voting. Look, the example I use is we're on a plantation, and the owner, we're all slaves, and the owner says, you can vote for Overseer Goody or Overseer Baddie. Overseer Baddie will beat the crap out of you every hour on the hour. Overseer Goody will beat the crap out of you once a month. So we all vote for Overseer Goody. Does that mean we support the system of slavery? We're slaves? No. We don't support it. So I am an anarchist. I support the LP. I ran for office on the LP. I ran for office on the LP before the national LP started. LP started in '71. I ran in '69 for the New York State Assembly. Didn't get too many votes, but what the heck. So I don't see anything wrong with politics. I think politics is good. Murray Rothbard used to say, for 6 weeks every 4 years, people focus on this, so why shouldn't we get our licks in too?
Weren't you a candidate for the vice president?
Yeah, I was also a candidate for vice president of the U.S. I didn't make it. I came in third out of fifth, but the heck. So I think I'm a member of the BC LP, and I'm certainly a member of the Louisiana LP and the federal LP. So one way to do it, there are only two ways to do it. One is pick up a gun and start shooting people, which I don't think we have a comparative advantage in. And I think it would be very bad to do that. The other is convince people. And how do you convince people? Well, you write books, you write articles, you do interviews on TV, you do the LP. What else can we do? Yeah, Paul.
What's the right way to pronounce Hoppy? Hoppa or Hoppa?
Hoppa is the way he pronounces it. I call it Hoppy because that's the Americanized way, I think.
You pronounce it?
Hoppa.
Hoppa.
I think that's right, the German way.
German.
But what did the Germans know about pronunciation of German names? I was going to say we're in America now, but that's not quite right either. Other comments, questions? Yes, sir.
So I'm still struggling with your idea of just surface rights and the distinction between mineral rights and human rights above. I see the case that you make as far as air pollution and whatnot, because fee would have to be charged. Actually, I don't know how to make this argument. I see the distinction in that air pollution affects other people in a negative way, right? And it's someone actively, negatively aggressing against someone else. Whereas in the case of mineral rights that were brought out, it's someone taking something from the land beneath you. In places like Kentucky and I believe in Texas, mineral rights are granted to the landowners. That which they own on surface, they also own beneath the ground. So the
Ad coelum doctrine.
Right. So the oil company or the mining company has to go to the landowner directly in order to extract the resources beneath them, right? And the landowners are able to go in with a drilling rig or whatever and go after the resources themselves, and they claim ownership over it. How do you make that distinction? Whereas if you have an airline or an industrial polluter at the adjacent property, I mean they're negatively aggressing against someone else, right? And so that's a problem. Whereas the minerals underneath someone's land, if that landowner didn't grant it to anyone, no one would necessarily be aggressed against it. It was just they didn't agree to give up that resource to which they have a claim over.
Well, this is the ad coelum doctrine. You're an ad coelum fan. You believe that people own stuff above and below.
Just below, not necessarily above.
Well, why not? Why do you make that distinction? Ad coelum means if you own the surface of on the earth, you own above and below a cone. Think of an ice cream cone where the tip is at the core of the earth, up to the heavens. I think that's just horrible doctrine because it violates libertarian homesteading theory. And I don't understand why you accept below but not above.
Okay, so what if the landowner bought the land on the assumption that they knew that the resource was there and that their goal was to get to it, right? But
let him go first. You own the land, go get it first. If I beat you to it, tough on you.
Or buy the land around.
yeah.
Victor?
It's still on the question of property rights. What's your stand on IP?
IP.
Intellectual property. There's disagreement on that.
I'm against IP. Intellectual property, the main ones are patents and copyrights,
Right.
trade secrets, other things like that. You see, to get back to Paul's point, you can only own scarce goods. If it's non-scarce, you can't own it. See, the whole point of property rights is that we can figure out who owns what. I have a key to a car, the car's outside, after we finish, I'm gonna get in that car. You guys are gonna get in your cars. If we have property rights, everybody knows. I have this shirt, you have that shirt, you have these shoes. We need property rights for scarce goods because there are only so many cars, only so many shirts. But there are things that are not scarce, and therefore we don't need to own them. For example, I now tell you 2 + 2 is 4. And I'm the first one, or I tell you E = MC squared.
Are you the first guy to make the
I'm the first guy,
wheel?
I'm the first guy to make the wheel. Or I'm the first guy, there are ways of making a cabin with logs. One way, you just put the logs one on top of the other. You need a lot of cement. The other way is you put little notches in the logs, and they sort of adhere to each other. I'm the interlocking logs. I'm the first one that did that. Or this young lady puts her hair up in a ponytail. And this young lady sees it and says, hey, that's a great idea. You keep the hair out of your face. I'm going to put my hair in a ponytail. And then this young lady goes over to this one and starts slapping her around for stealing her idea of a ponytail. But she still has her hair in a ponytail. She didn't violate her rights. Yeah, she saw the...
Non-rivalrous.
Well, they're non-rivalrous. They're non-scarce. The idea of a ponytail is not scarce. Somebody else sees somebody with a ponytail, and they put their hair in a ponytail. The first girl still's got her hair in a ponytail. So you didn't take it away from anyone. I come up with E = MC squared, and you somehow find out about it. I still have it. So we don't need property rights. So that's the deontology, the rights business. Now the objection is, well, if we didn't have protection on private property, on ideas, we wouldn't have ideas. Look, I invent the bicycle, and I get to the patent office 1 minute before you, and I own the bicycle idea, and if you make a bicycle, you go to jail unless you pay me permission to make the bicycle. So even Murray Rothbard opposes patents, because you invented the bicycle independently. You should have the idea, assuming people own ideas. So patents are totally out.
The patent troll is a big thing right now. There's a lot of people actually patent ideas, and they're actually just suing people for trying to.
That's, you see, now we're going to talk about utilitarianism. The objection to the opposition to IP is, well, we're not going to have computer code, we're not going to have pharmaceuticals, we're not going to have bicycles, we're not going to have technology. And here, in my view, it's sort of a horse race. On the one hand, at the beginning of the patent system or of the copyright system, supply curves slope upward. The more you pay for something, the more you'll get. The more permissions you get for owning your idea, the more people will try to come up with new ideas. So I agree. Initially, when the patent system starts, we'll probably get more pharmaceuticals and more computer code and more singing and more stuff like that. But after a while, what happens is I come up with a patent, not because I have anything, but just so I can sue you for patent infringement. And then we have a lot of very intelligent people, lawyers and chemists and engineers, and instead of inventing stuff, they're in court fighting over who owns what. Apple would be an example. So from a deontological point of view, you can't own it unless it's scarce, because the other person who took it from you, the logs, or the ponytail, or the bicycle idea, they still have it. So you see, if you take this watch, I no longer have it. That's theft. But if you take my idea, I still have my idea. So that would be the rights-based or the deontology of it. But the utilitarian or the pragmatic point of view, I'm willing to admit that when the system starts, there will be more ideas with the patent. But after a while, there'll be fewer, because people will start fighting over it, and instead of inventing new stuff, they'll fight over it.
The patent becomes the scarce resource.
Yeah, it's a monopoly right. So, and take another case. I wrote this book over here, but I'm a lousy seller of books. But you are really good. So what you do, you don't put Water Capitalism by Walter Block and Peter Nelson, my co-author. You put Water Capitalism, edited by, or authored by Block and Nelson, brought to you by, what's your name?
Bill.
Brought to you by Bill. So you're not lying. You're not saying you wrote it. You're just saying you're bringing it, and you copied the whole thing. Now you might say, well, that, I don't get any, what do you call it? Royalties. On the other hand, you sell 1 million of them, whereas I can only sell 100 of them because I'm a good writer, but I'm a lousy marketer. You sell 10 million of them. What happens to the demand curve for my speeches, public speeches? Everyone wants to hear me because you sold 1 million of them. So on the one hand, I don't get royalties, but on the other hand, I get notoriety. And my next book, I get a lot of money because 1 million of them sold, or 10 million of them sold. So my next book, I'm doing pretty well. So,
Walter, just to interrupt, at this point though, is there not an infringement of property rights if Bill was to place his name as the author of the book and selling it? Then
it would be fraud if he said he was the author, but he's not saying he's the author. He's admitting I'm the author. He's just saying he's the publisher.
that would be a violation of property rights?
No. It would be fraud if he said he's the author, because he's not the author. But he's the publisher. He's publishing a book. He copies every word faithfully.
And reaping the rewards.
Absolutely. He gives me no royalties. He's a rotten kid. He gives me no royalties. So to me, it's an empirical issue as to whether I'll write more or fewer books.
But if Bill brings Walter in to speak to the topic and pays Walter,
Well, no, Bill isn't going to pay. He's a rotten kid. He's not going to pay me.
Peter's worried about
He's a terrible
Walter's
person.
going to make a lot of money off of the flip side of it, because I've just sold 10 million books. And he can be introduced as an author of a book that sold 10 million
Right.
copies.
So you see, it's an empirical issue. On the one hand, I get fewer royalties. On the other hand, I get benefits. So it's an empirical issue. We can't say for sure. But from the rights point of view, he has every right. He bought the book. And look, suppose I made a copyright. I'm selling you this book on the condition you don't copy it. So you leave it on the park bench and you grab it and you do it.
Yep.
I mean, what are you going to promise you'll never lose the book? So the whole idea is silly.
This is exactly the
So from the point of view of deontology,
It really is.
or the point of view of rights,
Yeah.
it's very clear. No intellectual property. From the point of view of utilitarianism, it's an empirical issue. You can't say for sure. My reading of the empirical stuff is it'll help.
Yeah.
I copy the Beatles record. I don't say I did the Beatles. I just copy it. And now and I'm really good, and the Beatles are horrible at marketing. Let's say, well, I help the Beatles. On the other hand, I don't give them any royalties, so it's hard to say.
You can see actually the proof in a lot of companies now that are doing open source technology. You're seeing a lot of advancements even within that. Elon Musk is giving other companies his battery technology and so on and so forth.
The whole software behind the
Exactly.
Teslas.
He's doing very well from it.
Anyone else beside Paul? Paul.
I'm still worried about your definition of scarcity, because clearly new ideas are very scarce. The new ideas that change life are hard to come up with. I think what you're talking about is some ideas, they take a large sunk cost to get out there. And once they're out there, one additional user can use it at very low cost. So your defense of, or your attack on intellectual property rights, isn't that attack on hydroelectric wires, pipelines, and roads? Once they're built, one extra user is at zero cost, so anybody should be allowed to use it.
I didn't mention cost. I think cost is irrelevant. I think the key is ownership, not how much it costs. Look, ideas are very scarce before they're created. I admit that. But once they're invented, the ponytail. Girl A has a ponytail. It was very hard for her to come up with that idea. She struggled for years. There was a very funny Woody Allen thing about making the sandwich. He struggled for years. First there was, bologna and cheese and lettuce, and then finally bread on one side, and then after many years, bread on both sides. It's very hard to come up with ideas. I grant you that. But once the ideas are out there, once the bicycle is there, once the ponytail is there, everyone sees it.
Once the road is there, once the pipeline is there.
Finish the sentence. It's costless, but I'm not interested in cost. Cost is irrelevant. Once the idea is out there, it's easy to copy it. But it's not easy to copy a road. Just because you see a road, you can't make another road. Yes, sir.
I wanted to add a comment.
Speak a little louder.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. You can just go back to the NA key. For example, Coca-Cola is totally in the right to do everything in their power to protect their secret recipe. But the moment that a competitor comes up and somehow replicates their recipe, they are not allowed to use force to shut down the competitor. But they can do everything before the point of force to protect their ideals, right?
Yeah.
The same thing with a chef who creates a recipe. He can do everything, he can try as hard as he can to keep that recipe a secret. But that's up to him, how well he protects that secret. Once it gets out there, he's not allowed to use force to force his competitors to not.
And he still has that recipe. No one stole that recipe from him. I reverse engineered it. I bought his food, and I got a chemist, and now I know. But the original guy still has his recipe. I didn't steal it from him. Whereas if I took his frying pan, he doesn't have that frying pan.
And if the original guy has a reputation, that is something to be sold.
Absolutely. Like Bill was helping me with my reputation. Yeah.
Okay, I've got a more complex question on that vein then. So in Belgium this happened. There was a small monastery. They make Belgian beer. Someone from the monastery stole the yeast. The yeast actually contributes to the flavor and everything of said beer. So they stole the organism and they reproduced it on a mass scale with help from investors. So, how would you do that?
Well, that was theft. They took, the guy no longer had the yeast.
But no, he still has the yeast. He did a sample culture.
Look, you have 2 shoes.
Okay.
I take one of your shoes. You still have another shoe. I'm a thief.
Fair enough.
Right? I have a lot of yeast. You took some of it. You're a thief. Even though I still have some.
Yeah.
You didn't take it
And
all.
You can still produce the beer. He's still a thief.
He said, you're a thief. He stole some yeast. I have a lot of yeast left, but he stole some. He's a bad guy. We've got to put him in jail.
It's actually tangible, right? You can measure the amount of
Yeah,
use of someone.
he stole 3 pounds of yeast. I have 2 tons of it, but now I have 2 tons minus 3 pounds. He stole some of my yeast.
Ultimately, property rights is based on tangibility. It's just scarcity. And
Scarcity.
Okay.
Yeah,
Definitely be scarce.
yeah. I mean, if it's, I'm not sure about tangibility, but I am sure about scarcity. The idea of a bicycle, the idea of a ponytail is not scarce.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Well, you know, some girls have, what do you call it on their ponytail? Extra hair? What do you call that? Extension. Now, if you take her extension, then she no longer has that extension, so you're a thief. But if you just put your own hair in a ponytail, she still has a ponytail. You didn't touch her. You just looked at her and you put your hair in a ponytail. You're not a thief. If you take her extension, she doesn't, if you take half of, can you take half? I'm not sure. But if you take half of her extension, you're half a thief, or you're a thief. So cut it out. I'm wise to you. Mike, you had no questions? No? Okay. Okay.
You've exhausted the room, Walter.
Well, it's almost 8 o'clock.
It is almost 8, and
So-
I did scare that guy, but it won't last all night. I feel kind of bad. He looked a little sheepish afterwards. Yeah. Well, thank you, Walter.
Thank you.